quick. If for some reason you don't see a tool tab and a security tab, then what you want to do is go here and make sure you uncheck use simple file sharing under options, and you want to go through and make sure you've selected show hidden files and folders, and you've unchecked hide file extensions and hide protected operating system files, because you'll need to have done that for activities that we'll be doing later. In this case, it's color coded as an option, and you can turn that on and off, but green is for encrypted files. So in this case, only I have permission to view these files. They're encrypted with an algorithm. They're hashed. Only if I log in as administrator with the correct user ID and password and user's credentials can I see what's in these files. So that's one feature of NTFS. Now if I go over here and I want to compress the contents of that folder, I can compress it to save some space. Notice when I do that, if I check compress, it unchecks encrypt. If I check encrypt, it unchecks compress. Remember that compress and encrypt are mutually exclusive, so I can only do one or the other. I cannot do them both at the same time. In this case, I'll apply changes to subfolders and files. Notice instead of green, it turns blue this time, and in this case, they're compressed. Now, I haven't put anything in those files, so I don't really have anything to compress, but being text files, they could be considerably smaller in a compressed format. Please be aware that whenever you use either encryption or compression, there is a performance penalty in terms of CPU usage and memory. Every time I look at a compressed file, it has to go through a decompression routine, and that may take a few nanoseconds or so to inflate that file or decompress it. Every time I look at an encrypted file, it has to be decrypted using my credentials, my access token. So there is a little bit of a performance penalty there. But those are just some of the features, in this case, of an NTFS file system. Okay, let's quickly look at the permission system now. We said that under NTFS we have access control entries and a discretionary access control list. Again, you want to make sure in order for you to view the DACL and the ACEs, you need to make sure this is unchecked to use simple file sharing. If it is, let's pick a folder or a file on your system, right click on it, go to properties, go to security. Under the security tab, you can see the access control entries for that file or folder or object that's built into the NTFS file system. In this case, I'm going to add a user. And if I want to allow C Germany any of the access control entries on the discretionary access control list, I can allow or deny, explicit denial, or I can do an implicit denial just by simply not checking allow. There are also special permissions. If I wanted to go to that particular user, I could allow or deny these permissions and select for either that folder, child objects, parent objects. I can go to auditing. I can do security auditing on anything that, any user that happens to access that file or object. These all work with group policy now. If you set up a domain and you're in a Windows 2003, 2008, or even 2000 environment, I can take ownership or change ownership or grant ownership of that object. And then here's an effective permissions tool. But all of this has to do with the properties of the NTFS file system. It gives you that list of permissions that you can use to control who has access to what types of files on a system. Now, most companies, most organizations follow what's called the principle of least privilege, and that's generally considered the safest way to grant permission to files and resources in an organization. Basically, the principle of least privilege is only give someone the amount of permission that they need to do their job. If you give them more, it's not necessarily that you can't trust them, but if their password or their user account were to be compromised or taken over by someone outside the organization, or possibly a disgruntled employee within the organization, if they have more permission than they need to do their job, then whoever steals their password or compromises their security has more privileges to basically turn around and hack your information system. So it's a very effective tool, and that's one of the things that's made NTFS very popular. It's very robust. it has built-in capabilities for repairing damaged file system. Now we had talked a little bit about the boot INI file, so we'll take a look at that. If you were to go here under properties, and let's look at advanced, and let's go to startup and recovery. If I were going to select between different operating systems or partitions to boot to, I could select it here from this menu, but then I could also go here, and I could actually in Notepad open my boot INI file and add entries to my boot INI file or take entries away from my boot INI file. The formatting of it goes, in this case, if it's not SCSI, then this would be 0 IDE, the physical disk, or the port, and then the physical disk on that port, and then the partition in this case. And so here, this is the first available partition I have, and I'm booting Windows XP Professional, and in this case, when you boot, this would be displayed on the boot menu as far as what you could boot. Now, you won't actually see that if I reboot, because I have Vista also installed on this, and what you would get is Vista's boot menu. And that's something entirely different. It uses a BCD store or BCD database, and you have to use a tool called BCD Edit to modify the boot entries there. Okay, well, let's look at how we would recover if our file system became unbootable due to corruption or perhaps a modified boot record. What I want to do first is go into the system BIOS and I'll make it so that it will boot off the CD. In this case, we'll boot off the XP CD or 2003 CD or Vista CD, whatever, whichever operating system we might have or whatever CD we might have. This way, even if our drive's damaged or we can't boot, or our master boot record has been corrupted by a virus, or perhaps some other application or faulty install, we can simply boot right off the CD. We'll go into Recovery Console. We'll look at some of the tools that we can use to recover a hard drive. Anybody got a good joke? Let's take just a minute to boot off the CD here. Be a good time to go grab a cup of coffee while the CD's booting up here. Come back when you'll be ready to enter Recovery Console. This is a lot slower than accessing it from the hard drive, but we're going to make the assumption that the hard drive has become so